All right, I will say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin. Begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's shir. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the year of Tafshin Pei, the Tilson Family, for dedicating all the shir and drashos this year's zechus for besuros tovos for all of Am Yisroel. Our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Adler, Lavine, Teri and Steve Czinn, in loving memory of Teri's father, Dr. Kahn, Hersch ben Yosef HaKohen, the Ziv, Lavine and Behrman families in memory of Mr. Willian Ziv, Zev Shmuel ben Yisroel. And our week of learning sponsors, Nathan and Beth Adler, in memory of Judy, Goldman, Yehudis, Esther, Beth, Elozer, zechus. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the Neshamos Lavine Aliyah, the families in Nechama, all those who need a refuah shavon together with Kol Yisrael, Chol Baruch Hu Shli Meretz Hashem, bring home our hostages and allow our holy soldiers to be successful. B'chol Maaseh Yedehem. With that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today. Baruch Hashem. Today's daf is Tzadik Daled 94. We are picking up on Tzadik Gimel Amud Beis 93b. Rava Amar Demorach Vadoin. It is about 10 lines up from before it gets wide. So Rava Amar Demorach Vadoin. So the Rava says this is quite fascinating. So Rava says, who has the ability? Now, literally translated, Morach Vadoin means the ability to smell and judge. The Morach Vadoin, someone who has the ability to smell and judge, is ultimately fit to go ahead and lead. The Gemara says, "Dichsiv lo marainav yishpot v'shafa b'tzedek dalim b'ochiach b'meishal l'nesed." Suppose they say, what does this mean? That someone is able to smell and judge. So this idea is that one is able to go ahead and intuit. Rashi says over here, "My v'harichu demora badon shemeriach ba'adam v'shofet v'yodea mi achayev shneimar lo lemar." The idea over here is that there are people who possess such an acute sense of judgment that they're able to perceive that which is right and that which is wrong without even hearing all of the details, but are simply able to almost smell the MS. So the Gemara goes back to the Gemara says, Bar Koziva. The Gemara tells an incredible story. Bar Koziva, also known as Bar Kochva. Bar Kochva. So Bar Koziva, Rashi says over here, Mimalche Hordus Haya. He was one of the Herodian kings, right? One of the descendants of Herod. So he was a king over Klal Yisrael. So Bar Koziva Malach Tartin Shnin Upalga. So Bar Koziva ruled for 2.5 years. He said to Rabban, Ana Mashiach. I am the Mashiach. Bar Kochva was the self-declared Mashiach. Amrulei, b'Mashiach ksiv b'mora vadon. By Mashiach it says that he's able to go ahead and smell judgment. He doesn't need to hear all the details of the case. Rather, he's able just to go ahead and literally smell that which is right and that which is wrong. So the Gemara says, Nechze anon imorach vadon. So Bar Kochva, if you think that you're Mashiach, let's see. Can you smell justice? Kevan dechaziyud l'mora vadon katluhu. Once they saw that he was unable to smell justice, so they saw that he was a false Messiah, and they killed him. Now, this is interesting, right? Because there's some level of historical debate exactly what happened with Bar Kochva. Here the Gemara seems to indicate that Bar Kochva was killed by the Jews. Other accounts have it that Bar Kochva was killed by the Romans. So, okay, so interesting. Either way, Bar Kochva ultimately again leads the failed revolt. Just to point out, remember again, Rabbi Akiva thought that Bar Kochva was Mashiach. So Bar Kochva had a tremendous amount of support, not just as a leader of Klal Yisrael, but as a potential messianic figure as well. Okay, the Gemara goes weiter. Daniel, Chanaya, Mishael, Va'azari, Dechsibahu, Asher in Bahem Kol Mu'um, V'tovi Mar'eh, U'maskilim B'chachma, V'yodei Das, U'mavine Mada, V'asher Koach Bahem La'amo B'hechal HaMelech, V'lamdam Sefer, V'lashon Kazdim. So it's now this pasuk highlighting the praises of Chanaya, Mishael, and Azariah. So the Gemara now goes through it. Or Daniel, Chanaya, Mishael, and Azariah. Maya she'in bahem kolmum. What does it mean that they had no blemish? Rabbi Chama bar Chanina Amar afilu kerifta de kuslisa lo havabuhu. They didn't even have like the puncture of a needle of bloodletting. In other words, they were healthy. Baruch Hashem, they never even needed bloodletting. What does it mean that they had the strength to stand in the palace of the king? It means that when they were before the king, they would refrain from any type of laughter, from any type of frivolous chatter, from sleep. And they would abstain from going to the bathroom. They would hold back their knees because of the reverence for the monarchy. So you ask yourself, so what's the pshat? what does it matter? Like, okay, it's interesting information, but so what does it matter for us? So say on a very simple level, perhaps the idea is teaching us like this, that Daniel, Hanani, Mishael, and Azariah were able to abstain from frivolous laughter, frivolous chatter, sleep, and were even able to restrain their bodily needs because they were in the presence of the king. If they could do all of those things in the presence of a human king, then Allah has kama v'kama, the ability that we have to exercise self-restraint, and the ability that we have in order not to engage in frivolous activity, because we too stand before the king at all times. Incredible. Rabbi Elozer, kulam ne Yehudaim. So Rabbi Elozer says that all of them, Daniel, Hanani, Mishael, and Azariah, were all from Shevet Yehuda. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani Amar, Daniel b'mnei Yehuda, Hanani, Mishael, Azariah, Mishar Shvatim. No, so disagreement. So again, Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani says, no, Daniel was from Yehuda, but everyone else was from other Shvatim. So the pasuk says, from your sons that will come from you, the king will take them as srisim. Srisim, my srisim. What's a sris? So Rav Amar srisim mamish. Rav says it literally means like a eunuch. Right, the king would often castrate his servants in order that they should not be distracted by anything and be wholly and fully devoted to him. Rabbi Chanina Amar, shenistar avodah zara b'yameim. No, what it means is that avodah zara was like cut off. Avodah zara was castrated during their days. In other words, that they had a successful ability to remove avodah zara. So according to the opinion that says that avodah zara was, so to speak, castrated during their days. The chaval lo iti bahon. Elaman the amr srisim mamish my bechaval lo iti bahon. But according to the opinion that says that they were literal srisim, so what's the pshat in the pasuk? So the Gemara says, my bechaval lo iti bahon chavla denura. It means that ultimately, again, the chaval, that the fire had no effect on them. A reference to the kif shana ish, to the story of the furnace that we spent yesterday on. Vaksiv v'reach nor lo adas bahen lo chavla v'lorecha. What it means is, again, there was no fire, nor did the scent of smoke impact them as well. So according to the opinion that says that avodah zara was cut off during their days, Eleman the Amar Srisim Mamish Mishtaik Rabbi Gnusa de Tzadiki. But according to the opinion that says that there were Mamish Srisim, so ultimately again would the pasuk, would Hashem make reference of this level of degradation? To which the Gemara says Havabahu. It could be that it was both. That literally the king castrated them, but also they were able to cut off avodah zara during their days. Incredible. The Gemara goes weiter. Good. According to me, it says that there are mamish svisim. So the pasuk says, Tov mibanim umibanos. The pasuk says that the name that they established for themselves was even greater than potential physical offspring. So it makes sense, they had no physical offspring. Elman da'amr shenistar safadazar b'yamehem, my tov mibanim umibanos. It means better than apparently could very well be that before they were made srisim by the king, they had children, and unfortunately, again, those children predeceased them. Umay shem olam etein lo asher lo yikares. What does it mean? I will give them an eternal name; they will not be cut off. Sefer Daniel shenikra al shmo. That's called Sefer Daniel because ultimately, again, Sefer Daniel is named, obviously, again, by or for Daniel. Michte, Gemara asks a general question. It's not that I know that Sefer Daniel was named for Daniel. So Gemara asks an interesting question. Michte, Kalmili de Ezra Nehemiah ben Chachas, Kalmili de Ezra Nehemiah ben Chachaya Amrinu. So interesting enough, the Gemara says pretty much all of the words. Also I want to point out. Rashi points this out in our Tanakh, right? We have Sfarim Ezra and Nehemiah. In reality, there's really only one Sefer called Ezra. It was divided out later on. So the Gemara says something very interesting. Most of Sefer Ezra was actually prophesied by Nehemiah, said by Nehemiah. So if that's the case, why is it called Ezra and not Nehemiah? To which the Gemara says, "My tamilo ikri Sifra al Shmei." Why was it not called Sefer Nehemiah? On Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba, because ultimately, again, Nehemiah took a little bit too much credit for himself. Shne'emar, Zochra li Elokai letova. Remember me, my God, for good. I David Nami, Meimer Amra, Zochrini Hashem b'Ritzon Amecha, Paktini b'Shuasecha. I, David HaMelech, also said to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, remember me. taking credit, almost like he had a little bit of requisite merits in order to go ahead and have his tefillah granted. To which the Gemara said, David Rachmi of Kabai. David was asking for Rachmanis. David was asking for Rachmi for Klal Yisrael as well. Yosef Shasira Vignusan Shoishonim. But said, this is incredible. So Nehemiah doesn't merit to have the sefer named for him. Why? Because he spoke disparagingly about the earlier ones. So what does this mean? Shnei Amar, va'apachos harishonim asher lefanai, hechbidu ala'am, vayikchu mehem belechem, v'yayin v'achar kesef shkalim arba'im. So I will say this is incredible that Ezra disparaged Nehemiah disparaged the leaders that came before him, and ultimately accused them of exploiting their position for personal gain. Now, what's fascinating about say is, even though he may have been right, it might have been that what he said was factual, you can't malign other Jews. You can't malign other Jews. But we saw this in yesterday's daf, the opinion that says that the Hanani, Mishael, and Azariah drowned in saliva, right? They drowned in spit. We saw it to Marshal, who said that what does that mean? That they caused the nations of the world to speak negatively about Klal Yisrael for their non-belief. You can't speak negatively about Jews. You just can't. Even if what you're saying is true, and even if a point has to be made, a point has to somehow be made, always holding up the sanctity of the Jew, never chas v'shalom deconstructing the other. So therefore, again, because Nehemiah, perhaps truthfully, but nevertheless negatively spoke about Klal Yisrael, therefore he lost out having the sefer named in him. The Gemara said furthermore, he even spoke negatively about Daniel. Now, by the way, how do we know that Shekal Mimenu? How do we know that he was greater than him? So the Gemara says, good, all right, there's a lot of Rashi here, but okay, we'll do it a different time. Next cycle. V'ra'isi ani Daniel levadi es hamara, v'anoshim asher hayu imi lo ro'u es hamara, aval charada gidola nafla aleim, v'yivruchu behechavei, v'anashim asher hayu lo. So good. So the Gemara says, so how do we know that Daniel was greater than these other people? Because the pasuk records an episode where there was a dramatic vision. Daniel had the vision, and no one else saw it. No one else saw it but Daniel. So the fact that Daniel saw it, no one else saw it, indicates to us that Daniel is greater. The Gemara says, Umay ninhu anashim. Who were these other people who were with Daniel but didn't see the vision? Zechagai, Zechariah, Umalachi. The other prophets, Chagai, Zechariah, Malachi. So they were there with Daniel. They did not see the vision. Daniel saw the vision. Also, Tzadik Dalal Medalef 94a. Inu adif minayu, v'ihu adif minayu. So as I say, interestingly enough, in certain respects, Chagai, Zechariah, and Malachi were greater than Daniel, and in other respects, Daniel was greater than them. How so? So the Gemara says, Inhu adifim minei. So ultimately, again, Chagai, Zechariah, and Malachi were greater than Daniel. The Inhu Nevi, v'ihu lo navi, v'ihu lav navi. So as I say, interestingly enough, so Chagai, Zechariah, and Malachi were considered to be bona fide Nevi'im. Daniel apparently was a lower grade Navi. V'ihu adif minayhu, di'ihu chaza, v'inhu lo chazu. But Daniel was greater than them because Daniel had this vision and they did not have this vision. So the Gemara says, v'chime achar de lo chazu mai taima ivis. Well, again, here's the problem. If they didn't have the vision that Daniel had, then why were they frightened? Why were they frightened? What caused the fright? So I'll say this is very interesting. Afagav de'inu lo chazu midi mazlayu. Afagav de'ihu lo chazu midi mazlayu chazi. Even though they didn't see anything, their mazel saw. Now, what does this mean? What does it mean their mazel saw? So often mazel refers to like astrological signs. In this context, I think what it means is as follows. Every person has a malach, right? Every person has like a ministering angel who advocates for them, who looks over, Cheshach Baruch watches over this, but like a sign to me. So sometimes there are things that my malach sees that I don't see. But yet, again, there is like this synergistic connection between myself and my malach, and therefore the Gemara suggests over here that even if I don't see something and my malach sees something, so that has an impact on me. The Gemara says, Lavine shmamina hayman de mavis afagav deihu lo chazi mazle chazi. So this is fascinating. Sometimes in life, sometimes in life a person can be gripped by fear, and the fear doesn't even make sense, right? The fear itself could be illogical. But what does it mean sometimes when a person is gripped by fear, but they don't know why? Sometimes that could mean that my mazel saw something, my malach saw something, even though I didn't see it, my malach saw it, and that's having an impact on me. Incredible. So the Gemara says, "My takante." So what's the takana for that? In other words, let's say a person is gripped by fright, and they're not exactly sure, right, what the fright is, but I know that I want to get out of this emotion. Lin shof miduchte arba garmidi. So what should you do? Jump away from your present spot, dalaramas. Jump away, dalaramas. Inami likri kriyashma, or say shma. And if ultimately, again, you're standing in a place where, halacha l'maisa, again, it's dirty, so you can't say Shema, what should you say? Leimahachi, say the following. Iza de beitabcha shmeina minai. The goat of the slaughterhouse is fatter than me. Okay, so what exactly is going on over here? So perhaps the Gemara is teaching us, or Lavine is teaching us, three profound ideas. There are times in life when a person is gripped by fear. And there are times in life where I can't even understand what the fear is. What's the chap of fear? Fear is paralyzing. That's why fear is a very scary thing, because fear has the ability to literally paralyze me and keep me in place. What do you do in life when you are seized by fear? So there are three possibilities. Number one, jump dalaramas, which means move yourself forward. Number one is don't allow fear to paralyze you. Move yourself forward, even if it's only dalaramas. Whatever you do, don't remain in place. Because one thing is clear, is if you remain in place, what's going to happen? You remain in place, right? Nothing happens. So first thing, when seized by fear, is literally move yourself, even if it's only a little bit of amount, move yourself forward in life. Number two, say Shema. Say Shema. What does it say? Anchor yourself in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Shema is the ultimate way which I tether myself to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The greatest antidote to fear is a relationship with the Ribono Shel Olam. So you're seized by unintelligible, paralyzing fear. Say Shema, connect yourself to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That will give you the koach to move forward. And I will say, lastly, what should you do? Say, the goat in the slaughterhouse is fatter than me. What is that? Sometimes I will say, fear is nonsensical. So sometimes the way to shake off fear is to say, this isn't real. This is not real. So that statement of the goat in the slaughterhouse is fatter than me, it's just like a statement that's like how do you feel when you say that statement? What's your reaction when you say that statement? You giggle a little bit, right? There's like a smile. Like the idea over here is, so many times in life we're paralyzed by things that aren't real. They're not real. They're perceived. So sometimes what you need to do is you break the hold on fear by saying something like a shtickle nonsensical. So say a little nonsensical, kind of like change the mood a little bit and be able to move yourself forward. When gripped by paralyzing fear, number one, move yourself forward, anchor yourself to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and remind yourself that it's not real. If you do those three things, or even if it is real, it's not as real as it actually feels. You'll be able to move yourself forward even in the midst of the most immobilizing fear. Incredible. So the Gemara says, Lememra. So the Gemara says, Lemar beham shar v'hashalom ein kates. Amram tanchum darsh bar kavra b'sipori. Mipnei mem kol mem sheba emsa teva pasuach v'zeh sasam. In general, a mem in the middle of a pasuk, right, is open, and only the mem at the end of a word is closed. But yet in this word, mem in the middle is closed. Bikish Chash Baruch Hu lasos Chizkiyo Mashiach. Supposed to say this is incredible. So this pasuk is by Chizkiyo, the king of Yehuda. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to make Chizkiyo Mashiach the Sanhedrin Gog uMagog. And remember again, Sanhedrin, who comes out to do battle with Chizkiyo, Hashem wanted to make him Gog uMagog. Remember again, there's this war of Gog uMagog, which is this ultimate showdown between good and evil, which precedes the Messianic era. So Hashem wanted to make Chizkiyo Mashiach and Sanhedrin Gog uMagog. Amar midas hadin l'fnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu Rebbeinu Shalom. Umad David Melech Yisrael Shomer Kama Shiros Shishbachos Lefanecha Lo Asisa Mashiach. So the midas hadin, the attribute of strict justice, comes to Rebbeinu Shalom. I'll say it's almost like there's like a system of checks and balances, like Lahavlan Chosh Baruch Hu. Rebbeinu Shalom is ready to go to make Chizkiyo Melech. The midas hadin says, what? David was greater than Chizkiyo, and you didn't make David Mashiach. So the Gemara says, "V'lo asasa Mashiach Chizkiyo sha'asisa l'kol nisim." Right? So Chizkiyo sha'asa l'kol nisim alalu. V'lo amar shir lefanecha ta'aseo Mashiach. So again, Chizkiyo, ultimately again, who you did so many miracles for. And yet, unfortunately, he didn't sing Shira. David sang so much Shira, Tefer Tehillim. Chizkiyo, he did so many miracles for him. He didn't sing Shira. You're going to make him Mashiach. L'chach nistatim. Therefore the mem, right? The mem which represents Mashiach. The mem was closed. It was closed. Hashem wanted to make Chizkiyahu Mashiach, and then the mem was closed because the Midas Hadin shut it down, preventing Chizkiyahu from coming Mashiach. I both say, what do you see from here? What do you see from here? What prevented Chizkiyahu from becoming Mashiach? His lack of Shira. His lack of Shira. You see from here the power of gratitude to the Ribono Shalom. And the ability, the greatness of David HaMelech was not only Shira, but it was Shira at all times. Shira in times of good, Shira in times of challenge, Shira in times of happiness, Shira in times of tragedy. That is the avoda of the Yid, and that is the quality of Mashiach. The ability to sing Shira to HaKadosh Baruch Hu no matter what's happening in life. The Gemara goes right to Miyad, Pascha Aretz V'Amar Lefanav Ribono Shalom. Listen to this, this is such a beautiful Gemara. The earth, says Hashem, Ani Omeres Lefanecha Shira Tachas Tzadik Zeh V'Aso Mashiach. Wow. V'Aso Mashiach. So the earth says, Ribono Shalom, please, make Chizkiyahu Mashiach. He didn't sing Shira, I'll sing Shira for Chizkiyahu. I'll sing Shira on his behalf. The Gemara says, Pascha V'Amar Shira Lefanav Shneimar Miknef Ha'aretz Zmiros Shamanu Tzvi L'Tzadik. Amar Sarah Olam Lefanav Ribono Shalom Sivyono Asa L'Tzadik Zeh. So ultimately, again, the Sarah Olam. Interestingly enough, Rashi says, Malach Shekola Olam Masra Biyado. So whatever this means, apparently there's like a Malach who's like, universe CEO. HaKadosh Baruch Hu delegates to him. So the Sarah Olam said to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Shamanu Tzvi L'Tzadik. Sarah Olam Shamar Asat Tzivyono Shal Tzadik. So the Sarah Olam says to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, again, it seems like the universe is acting on behalf of the Tzadik. Yad Sabas Kova Amra, Razi Li. So we'll say, so the Sarah Olam says to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, okay, so let's go. Make Tzidkiyahu Mashiach. Now the earth has said Shira on his behalf, right? He didn't say Shira, earth says Shira on his behalf. The Baskel came out and said, Razi Li, the secrets of the world are for me. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I've changed my mind, Kiviyachol, and Chizkiyahu is not going to be Mashiach. Amr Li, Amr Navi, Oili, Ad Mosai. So the Navi says, woe to me, right? For how long? Now the Navi now is lamenting that Mashiach has not yet come. So they're saying, when will Mashiach come? Yasas Abbas Kalva Amra, Bogdim, Bogdu, Ubagad, Bogdim, Ubagad, Bogdim, Bogdu. What does it mean? Amra Veitim Rabbi Yitzchak, Ad Da'asu, Bozazei, Ubozazei, Debozazei. Until again, literally, there are enemies and enemies of enemies. Meaning that unfortunately, Klal Yisrael has to suffer much until Mashiach comes. Masa Doma Elai Kori Mesir, Shomer Mami Laila, Shomer Mami Lel, Amra B'Yochanan, Oso Alachamun Ala Ruchos. Duma Shmo. The Malach who's in charge of the winds, his name is Duma. So the Gemara says, Netzkaptzu kala ruchos etzel Duma. So all of the winds came to Duma. Amrulo, Shomer ma milayla, Shomer ma milel. So essentially, again, I will say, if you take a look at Rashi says over here, Sar haruchos, shaneshamos nifkados etzlo, v'hainu masa Duma, kach amar Duma elai. So interesting enough, Rashi understands that Ruach over here is not wind, but instead Ruach is neshamas. Neshamas. This is the Malach who's in charge of all of the Neshamas. So everyone comes to this Malach and asks him, Shomer ma milel, ma davar, masai keitza geula milel zeh. When is Geula going to come? But say it's incredible, by the way, to see what the Gemara is highlighting over here is we often think that we are the only ones, we, being mankind, Klal Yisrael, are the only ones constantly and consistently pushing for Mashiach. What you begin to see is something absolutely amazing. The world wants Mashiach. The world wants Mashiach. Universe wants Mashiach. And everything is constantly pushing for Mashiach. So the Gemara says, Amar Shomer, Asa Boker V'Gam Laila, Im Tibayun Bayun Shuv Asayu. So what does this mean? So the Shomer says, Asa Boker V'Gam Laila, Im Tibayun Bayun. So ultimately, again, there's going to be, the Boker will come, the dawn will come, but at the end of the day, only after a great light. Rashi says, Asa Boker V'Tmiya. This from the Lokasa B'Hu V'Nachon Amar L'Masar, Kach Amar Shomer HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Asa Boker Gula Tavo, V'Gam Laila, Avam Etchila Tia Galus Habib. Morning will come, but before morning, there will be a great night. Incredible. So the Gemara says, Amar Shomer, Asa Boker, V'Gam Laila, Im Tebayun, Bayu, V'Shuvu Asayu. So there's two things. So, right, morning will come. But when will morning will come? Number one, Im Tebayun. If you yearn for it. You have to yearn for it. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not going to give us anything if we don't yearn for it. And number two, Shuvu Asayu. Ultimately, again, we have to do tshuva. So we'll say two elements. It's interesting. There seems to be many elements to Geula. But here, the Malach who's in charge of the Neshama says, what is Cheshach Baruch Hu waiting for? Number one, he needs us to want it. If we don't want it badly enough, then He's not going to give it to us. And number two, to become Baalei Tshuva. If we could have these two elements, then at the end of the day, Mashiach will come. Incredible. Rabbi Pappas, Ginai hu Chizkiyahu v'siyaitu shlo amru shira ad shepascha ad amru shira. But we'll say first wide lines at the it's the widest line. It was embarrassing for Chizkiyahu that he did not say shira until the earth came along and said shira. Shene Amar miknaf haaretz zemiro shamanu tzvi latzadik. Keltzer v'davar ata omer. Vayomer Yisro. So we'll say other examples of situations where Klal Yisrael did not say shira until someone else reminded us to do it. Vayomer Yisro. Baruch Hashem asher hitzil eschem. Yisro says, "Blessed is God who saved you, Klal Yisrael." So the Gemara says, "Talmud Rabbi Pappas, Gnai hu leMoshe v'shishim rivo shelo amru Baruch." Ad sheba Yisro v'amar Baruch Hashem. It was embarrassing for Moshe and Klal Yisrael that Moshe and Klal Yisrael didn't say Baruch Hashem until Yisro came along and said Baruch. Now again, remember, Moshe and Klal Yisrael said Shira, Az Yashir Moshe b'nei Yisrael, but no one used the formulation of Baruch Hashem until Yisro came along. And that was embarrassing that Yisro was the innovator of this, not Klal Yisrael. Vayichad Yisro. So we'll say, interestingly enough, Vayichad, what does that mean? Rav Shmuel, Rav Amar, Shehevir Cherev Chada al Besaro. He circumcised himself. Yisro was so impressed and so overwhelmed by Klal Yisrael, he wanted to join the ranks of Klal Yisrael, he gave himself a bris milah. Shmuel says, Shenase chadudim kol Besaro. He got goosebumps. Why? So the Gemara says, Amarav, so we'll say, it's interesting that the goosebumps are understood to mean that Yisro was overwhelmed by what happened to Mitzrayim. And again, as much as he was awed by what HaKadosh Baruch Hu did, he was a member of the Umos HaOlam. He was a member of the nations of the world, and he was very overwhelmed by what he saw happen to the Gentile nations of Egypt. So the Gemara says, Amarav, we see from here, Inshi, Giyura, Adasara Dari Lotivza Aramai Kamei. You see from here a very important yesod, that in front of a convert, do not disparage Gentiles for up to 10 generations. So we'll say this is just such a fascinating idea. That on one hand, when someone converts, what do we say? Gershin is dami. You're a new person. It's true that he's a new person. I would say, but fascinating. Just because I'm a new person doesn't mean I don't have a past. Which sounds a little bit contradictory, but only Jews can live in this world of contradictions. So the Gemara says, be sensitive to the fact about what you say about Gentiles in front of converts. Because at the end of the day, a person came from that world. So if you're disparaging of that world, that person is going to feel that pain. So Yisro, remember again, Yisro left everything in order to come to Klal Yisrael. He's a Gerrit. In other words, he circumcised all these things. But at the end of the day, that's the world he came from. And because of that, there was a sensitivity there. The Gemara says, be cognizant of that sensitivity. Fascinating. So the Gemara says, L'chein, Yishalach Adon Hashem tzvakos me'mishman of razon, my mishman of razon, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Yavach Chizkiyahu, sheyesh lo shmona shemos, v'yifra misancherev sheyesh lo shmona shemos. Let Chizkiyahu, and I will say, remember, there's a lot of allusions, we're going to see more over here, this battle between Sanhedrin and Chizkiyahu. So let Chizkiyahu, who has 8 names, let him come and conquer, or I should say overcome, v'yifra, exact punishment from Sanhedrin, who has 8 names. So now the Gemara just goes through the names. Chizkiyahu dichsev ki yaled yulad lanu ben nitin lanu vati hamishra al shechmo v'yikra shmo Peleyoetz El Gibor Aviad Sar Shalom I V'Ha'ika Chizkiyahu. Okay, but what about his actual name Chizkiyahu? To which the Gemara says, interestingly enough, Chizkiyahu might not have been his real name, might have been a descriptive name. Shechasku Ka. Chizkiyahu really is just a descriptive name. The HaKohen Baruch Hu gave him strength. Davar Acher Chizkiyahu Shma Chizkiyahu Shechizek Es Yisrael Avim Shebashamayim. So we'll say other possibilities. Once again, Chizkiyahu is not a real name; it's a descriptive name. Why is he called Chizkiyahu? Ultimately, because he strengthened the bond between Klal Yisrael and HaKohen Baruch Hu. We'll see more about that in just a little bit. Sanhedrin, what are Sanhedrin? All of Sanhedrin's names: Dichsiv Bey, Tiglas Pileser, Planeser, Shalmaneser, Pul, Sargon, Asanpar, Rava, V'Yakira. Okay, I V'Yika Sanhedrin. What about Sanhedrin? Right? In other words, they forgot about that name. To which the Gemara says, no. Also, that's descriptive. The Gemara says, Shesichaso Riv. He was very quarrelsome in the way that he spoke. Right? Sanhedrin, we're going to see, spoke in a quarrelsome fashion to HaKohen Baruch Hu. Davar Acher, Shesach V'Nicher Dvarim Klape Mala. That literally, again, He spoke, and he was defiant with his words to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. All right, incredible. So it says, here's what's interesting. So Sanhedrin, if you look at some of these names, Sanhedrin was actually given some pretty significant titles. This Asanpar, Rava V'Akira. So leaving aside Asanpar for just a moment, Rava V'Akira means great and precious. How was Sanhedrin given these names? This is wild. Because Sanhedrin, right now, remember Sanhedrin, who caused much destruction, but yet he never spoke disparagingly about Eretz Yisrael. Shneimar, ad bo'i v'lakachti eschem el eretz ka'artzichem. So I'll say this is incredible. Sanhedrin, when he was exiling Jews, what did he say to the Jews? I'm going to take you to a land that is like your land. He doesn't say a land better than your land. Rather, he says a land like your land. He was careful about how he spoke about Eretz Yisrael. So Rabbi Shmuel both said, so Chadam HaMelech Bikei Achaya, the Chadam HaMelech Tipei Shaya. One says that Sanhedrin was very wise, and one says Sanhedrin was very foolish. How so? L'mandar HaMelech Bikei Achaya, according to the one who said that he was a smart king, Ihav Amina Luhu Adifa Me'araychu, Amru Kamashakris. So I'll say, so ultimately the one who says he was a smart king is because Sanhedrin knew if he would tell the Jews, I'm taking you to a better land, there's nothing better than Eretz Yisrael. And they would dismiss his words as just being foolish. Right? So therefore he purposely said, I'll take you to a land like your land. The opinion that says that he was a foolish king, I'm sorry. Mandar Melech Tipei Shaya Imkein Mai Rabuse. The owner says that he was foolish is apparently Sanhedrin is trying to get the buy-in of the Jews for relocation. So if you're going to get their buy-in for relocation to tell them that they're being moved to a similar type of land, why would they buy into that? He should have told them it's better, and they would have more readily bought into it. Okay, the Gemara says, Lahecha Aglilu. Where did he, supposed to say, just want to point out how incredible this is. Right, so Sanhedrin is held in higher esteem by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Why? Because he did not speak negatively about Eretz Yisrael. He killed Jews, he exiled Jews, he destroyed parts of them, but he never spoke negatively about the land. Such an incredible idea. So the Gemara goes back to Lahecha Aglilu. By the way, where did Sanhedrin exile the Jews to? So the Gemara says, Marzutra Ami La Afriki. So Afriki, Rabbi Chanina Amar Lahari Slug. Hari Slug. Fine, different places we exile them. Aval Yisrael Sipru B'Gnusa Shel Eretz Yisrael. Unfortunately, as much as Sanhedrin never spoke negatively about Eretz Yisrael, Klal Yisrael did speak negatively about Eretz Yisrael. Kimatu, says Kimatu Sos, when they came to this place called Sos, Amri Shavya Ki Arin. They called it Sos. They named it Sos because they said, oh, this new land is just as nice as our land. Kimatu Almin, when they came to a place called Almin, Amru Ke Almin. They said, ultimately, again, this is like our land as well. Kimatu Sos Trey, when they came to a place called Sos Trey, Amri Al-Chad Trin. They said, this is twice as good as Eretz Yisrael. So unfortunately, I will say, this has unfortunately been sometimes the downfall of Klal Yisrael throughout the ages, where we find ourselves in new lands, and we deceive ourselves into thinking that where we are is actually better than Eretz Yisrael. Not that it's okay, not that it's maybe just as nice, but to think that even Chas v'Shalom, somehow it's even better than Eretz Yisrael. So again, something to be learned from everyone, even as Sanhedrin. Sanhedrin was always careful about how he spoke about the sanctity, or how he spoke just about the land itself. Incredible. So the Gemara says as follows. Good. The Gemara says, good. Good. V'sachas kvodo yikod ki yikod eish. Rabbi Yochanan. Tachas kvodo v'lo kvodo mamish. Rashi says over here, Tachas gufo mamish shaguf kaim u'neshama nesrefas. Now both say, this is talking about again when Sanhedrin's army was defeated. So how was it defeated? So the Gemara says, Tachas kvodo v'lo kvodo mamish. Sanhedrin's army, we're going to see, their bodies remained intact. They were killed by having their neshamas incinerated. So the Gemara says, Kihad Rabbi Yochanan, Karile lamani machbedusai. Like Rabbi Yochanan called his clothing those things that give me honor. So we'll say this is actually very reminiscent of the Gemara that we saw yesterday, that even in this time of sakana, a person should make sure to keep himself intact, right? The Gemara says, like Hanai Mishlan Azariah, even though they're thrown into the furnace, they made sure that they're wearing proper clothing. Your clothing is called the thing that gives you honor. How you dress says a lot about the person you are. And how you dress for certain things ultimately telegraphs a message about the importance that you ascribe to that particular event. So I'll say, so therefore your clothes, it's interesting, your clothing is what gives you honor. So the Moshe Rabbi Elozer, Amar Tachas Kvodo Mamish, Kisreifas B'nei Aaron. Mala Alon Sreifas Neshama V'guf Kayim, Afkan Sreifas Neshama V'guf Kayim. So we'll say, just like by the death of Aaron's sons. By the death of Aaron's sons, so remember again, the fire came in, incinerated their neshamas, but their bodies were intact. So too when Sanheriv's army was killed, their neshamas were incinerated, but their bodies remained intact. So Gemara says, Tana Shed Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha, Paro, Shechiref Ba'atzmo, Nifra Kadosh Baruch Hu Mena B'atzmo. So this is incredible. Paro, who literally again blasphemed Hashem himself, right? Because Paro says, Mi Hashem Asher Eshma B'kolo. So Paro himself, who blasphemed, his punishment comes directly from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Sancherev, Shechiref, both say Amud Beis, Sancherev, Shechiref, Ayidei Shaliach. Sancherev ultimately again, who kind of blasphemed through a Shaliach, HaKadosh Baruch Hu nifra mimenu, nifra HaKadosh Baruch Hu mimenu ayidei Shaliach. So ultimately again, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu exacted punishment from him through a Shaliach. Okay, so what's going on over here? So Gemara says, Paro d'chsib bei, mi Hashem asher eshma b'kolo. So Paro says, who is Hashem? So Paro directly blasphemes. Who is Hashem that I should listen to him? Nifra HaKadosh Baruch Hu Mena B'atzmo. HaKadosh Baruch Hu exacts punishment from him himself. D'chsiv vayinar Hashem es Mitzrayim b'soch hayam. Right? By Yam Suf. Hashem himself stirred the waters of Yam Suf. D'chsiv darachta b'Yam Susecha. Sancheriv d'chsiv biyad malachecha charafta Hashem. So ultimately again, biyad malachecha cherpas Hashem. So ultimately again, Sancheriv, who says, in the hands of kings is the degradation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So Nifra HaKadosh, so again, Sancheriv doesn't say straight out a statement of blaspheming, but rather again, he says it kind of indirectly. So therefore again, the Gemara says, Nifra HaKadosh Baruch Hu mimeno ayidei Shaliach. HaKadosh Baruch Hu exacted punishment from him through Shaliach as well. D'chsiv, vayetze malach Hashem, Vayach b'machane ashur mea v'shmonim v'chamishim elef. So as I remember again, this was this was like the incredible story where Chizkiyahu essentially said, like HaKadosh Baruch Hu, there was no way for Klal Yisrael to defeat the army of Sanhedrin. So this is the famous story where Chizkiyahu goes to sleep at night. He says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I'm going to go to sleep, and you do you. You work your magic. And miraculously, that night, 185,000 soldiers died in their sleep. Just died. Just like HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought about. So that, if you notice, the lashon over here is Vayetze Malach Hashem. It wasn't that HaKadosh Baruch Hu Kiviyachol who did it himself, but ultimately again, right, like we see on Pesach, Ani v'lo Malach. This was Malach v'lo Ani. HaKadosh Baruch Hu sent the Malach. Why indirect? Why indirect? Sancheriv blasphemed indirectly. Therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu exactly punishment indirectly. Rabbi Chanina bar Papa Rami Ksiv Marom Kitzo Uksiv Malon Kitzo. Shabbos said this is very interesting. So the Gemara says Marom Kitzo, which literally means again the heavens. The heavens are his abode, and then it says Malon Kitzo. Malon literally means like a domicile, a dwelling, right? Rashi says over here Marom Kitzo b'Yeshaya, uksiv Malon Kitzo b'Melachim. Marom Kitzo mashma dira shalmata. So one talks about the dwelling of HaKadosh Baruch Hu on high, and when on earth. Amar also Rasha betchila achrev dira shalmata, v'yachakach achrev dira shalmata. Both say you could see the unholy aspirations of Sancheriv. Right? Sancheriv says, first, I will destroy the house of God in this world. And then afterwards, again, I'll destroy the house of God in the celestial sphere. I'm Rabbi Shmuel Levi. Mai dechsiv ata hamibala de Hashem alisi alamakom hazeh la shchiso. Hashem amar elai ala aretz hazos v'shchisa. So I'll say, so this is very interesting. So one of the fascinating ideas about Sancheriv is Sancheriv felt that he received divine instructions to go and destroy Eretz Yisrael. He thought that this was a divinely orchestrated message. So Rashi says over here. So again, before we get Rashi, so Rashi says, "Ata hamibaladei Hashem alisa lamakom hazeh." So Sancheriv says, "Would I march against Yerushalayim without explicit instructions from God? Hashem amar ilai alei ala aretz hazos v'shchisa." Hashem has said to me, "Come to this land of Israel." We'll say, which is pretty wild. So Sancheriv is essentially saying that he's acting by the word of God. So Maihi, the Gemara says, what are you talking about? Where did Sanhedrin hear from HaKadosh Baruch Hu to destroy Eretz Yisrael? Where do we ever hear of such a thing like this? So the Gemara said, Shmuel Navi Dikamar, Ya'an Kima Sa'amazeh, Esmi Ashiloach HaHochim La'at La'at, Umisos Es Ratzon Uben Rimal Yahu. So we'll say, so what happened? So interestingly enough, so Sanhedrin overhears the Navi. He hears the Navi talking, the Navi Yeshaya talking, and the Navi says that essentially Klal Yisrael has forsaken HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Klal Yisrael Ma'as, they've degraded HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and ultimately, again, it's Mea Shilach HaOchim La'atlat, they have forsaken the Shiloach waters, which flow gently, and instead they have gone ahead and taken to Ratzon ben Rimal Yo. So we'll see what all of this means in just a little bit. I'm Rabbi Yosef. Elmolei Targuma Dahaikra Lo Habi Yadana Maikamar. So Rabbi Yosef says, were it not for the explanation of this pasuk, we would have no idea what it's talking about. Like, no kidding, right? We have no idea what it's talking about. So what is this? So the Gemara says, Maikamar. So the Gemara says, Chalaf, Dikatz Amahadem B'Malchusa de Beis David. So this nation has forsaken the Davidic kingdom. Right? This nation has forsaken Malchus Beis David. That are kind to them and speak to them softly the way the Shiloach waters flow. Right? The Shiloach Abosai comes as a spring-fed stream, and it flows gently. So this nation was governed by Malchus Beis David, who governed them and looked after them in such a kind and beautiful way, and they gave that all up. Right? They have forsaken that. The Israel beratzin ubar remalyo, and instead, ultimately, again, they go ahead and they go to other things, right? They go ahead and they go essentially to avodah zarah. So what's interesting over here is so Sanhedrin hears the Navi taking Klal Yisrael to task, and he feels okay. So Klal Yisrael is not doing the right thing. Obviously, again, it's time for them to lose that which they hold most dear. Beis Hamikdash, Eretz Yisrael. Ma'aras Hashem bebeis Rasha, v'navei tzadik yovorach. Ma'aras Hashem bebeis Rasha. What does it mean again? That ultimately the curse of Hashem is in the house of the Rasha. Zeh Pekach ben Remalyo. So we'll say, by the way, Pekach ben Remalyo was the king over Malchus Yisrael. Right? He was king over Malchus Yisrael. He was a Rasha. So how was he such a Rasha? He would eat literally again 40 pigeons for dessert. So apparently again, pigeon was a big dessert. Okay, don't knock it till you try it, right? So the nice again, he would eat all of these pigeons and he still would not be full. Now we'll say, now what does that highlight? What does that highlight? That highlights like a gluttonous type of lifestyle. Now we'll say, what avodah zarah, in general, whenever you see avodah zarah, what do you see alongside avodah zarah? Hedonistic behavior. Like Rav Shmuel Silber Hersch brings down, what's the chilik between avodah zarah and avodah Hashem? What's the chilik, the fundamental chilik? Avodah zarah is you make God in your image. Avodas Hashem is I make myself in God. What does everybody love about Avodah Zarah? We'll say, if you notice by something very interesting very quickly about Avodah Zarah is, even when Klal Yisrael worshipped Avodah Zarah, it's not like they stopped worshipping Hashem. Very often, they were still worshipping Hashem with Avodah Zarah. So if you're worshipping Hashem, why are you bringing in Avodah Zarah? Because Avodah Zarah is great. How does Avodah Zarah work? Here's how it works, right? But maybe you know someone needs this information. If you want to start your own idolatry, right? Step one, write down all the stuff you want to do in life, right? All the stuff you really want to do, okay? Then make a new system of theology that allows for all of that, right? So all the stuff you want to do, suddenly again, not only is it mutter, but it's a mitzvah. A mitzvah. And then all the stuff that you really don't care about not doing, make that all the los ases, right? So all the stuff you really want to do in life, you want arayas, you want tarfus, you want tumah good, that becomes all of the mitzvahs, right? That's avodah zarah. That's avodah zarah. So wherever you see avodah zarah, you see a heightened form of hedonistic behavior, because that's what it's all about. It's actually not about the theology. It's really never about the theology. It's about that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has very high expectations of us. And therefore he tells us we can't do a lot of stuff. Why? To hold us to a high standard. Avodah zarah says, but I want to do that stuff. So I create a new system of theology in order to allow for all of that to occur. So Pekach ben Remalyo is eating all of these pigeons, but he can't be satiated. Why? Because he's an Oved Avodah Zarah. Oved Avodah Zarah is a heathen. Okay, so the Gemara goes weiter. V'navei tzadik yivorach zeh Chizkiyahu melech Yehuda she'ochel litre yerek besuda. It's incredible. What was Chizkiyahu's meal? Chizkiyahu would eat a little bit of vegetables, and he would be full. he would be fine. I will say he was a king. He was a king. He could have had anything he wanted, but he didn't need a lot. He did not need a lot, which I will say also says that sometimes when we become a little bit too wrapped up in the material, that may be an indication that our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu might not be as it should. I will say, remember, all of us have a void. We have an emptiness in life, and we're always trying to fill it. The issue just is, if I have a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then I'm filling it with the right things. If I don't have a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then I'm filling it with all of the wrong things. Incredible. So the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, "V'lachein hinei Hashem mala alei esmei hanar ha'atzumim ba'aravim esmelach Ashur." So again, because of Klal Yisrael's non-compliance, Hashem says, "I'm going to bring against you the king of Ashur, Ksiv v'chalaf biYehuda shetef v'avar atzavar yagia." Ella, my time, and so therefore again, so Sanhedrin hears this. Sanhedrin hears all this stuff, and he hears the Navi literally says. Well, I just want to point out, Sanhedrin was the king of Ashur. The Navi literally says, because of your non-compliance, right, because of your terrible behavior, I'm bringing against you the king of Ashur. So Sanhedrin says, okay, God wants me to do this. So if God wants me to do this, the Gemara says, so if that's the case, Elamai Time, so why was he punished? If Sanhedrin actually did the will of God, why was he punished? The Gemara says, Navi Aseres Hashvatim is Navi, Ihu Yoav Date Klu Yushalayim. Very simple. Sanhedrin was the tool of Hashem to exact punishment against the 10 tribes. He was the one who was responsible to exile the 10 tribes. He had no business in Yerushalayim. But Sanhedrin set his sights on Yerushalayim as well. Banavi v'amarlei kilo mu'af la Hashem mutzak la. Amar Elozer barachya a nimsar am ayif b'Torah bi'ad miha matzik lo. So ultimately, again, so the Navi tells Sanhedrin, you overstepped. Your avodah was to exact punishment from the 10 shvatim, from the 10 tribes. You set your sights on Yerushalayim, so that you don't have any power on. Right? Ultimately, again, literally, you cannot go ahead. The Am Ha'ayef, so the tired nation. I would say, who's the tired nation? It's interesting. It's Klal Yisrael. We're the tired nation. But interestingly enough, not tired because of suffering, tired because we toil in Torah, tired because we're constantly building a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So ultimately, again, the nation that's tired cannot be handed over in the hands of an enemy. So the Gemara says, "My keis harishon hakela arza zvulun v'arza naftali v'achron hichbid derech hayam ever arden galo hagayim lo karishonim shekilim aleim al Torah." So ultimately, again, we are not like the early ones. This is reference to Malchus Yisrael, who threw off from them the yoke of Torah. Aval achron v'malchus Yehuda shechbidu aleim al Torah ureuyin halalu lasos lahem neis ka'ovrei hayam ukidarchei hayarden. So we'll say this is fascinating. So Sanhedrin, you could have control over Malchus Yisrael. Why? Because Malchus Yisrael threw off the yoke of Torah. And when you throw off the yoke of Torah, you have a lack of divine protection, but you have no control ultimately again over Malchus Yehuda. Because of Malchus Yehuda, they took upon themselves the yoke of Torah, and they were deserving of miracles, like literally again, like the splitting of the Yam Suf and the splitting of the Yarden. So the Gemara says, "M'chozer b'mutav ve'im lav ani eso lo golil bagoyim." So Sanhedrin, if you turn back, right, and you don't go to war against Malchus Yehuda, you'll be fine. If not, ultimately, again, I will turn you into a degradation amongst the nations. Right? Rashi says over here, you'll become a source of degradation. Right? The laughing stock amongst it. This is the Sanhedrin. So we'll say, interestingly enough, Sanhedrin did have a divine mission by the 10 tribes of Malchus Yisrael. But his mistake was going after Malchus Yehuda, was going after the Beis HaMikdash, going after Yerushalayim. So the Gemara goes weiter. So Achari hadvarim va'emas ha'ila basancher melech Ashur va'yavo Yehuda va'yichan ala arim ha-besuros va'yomer livka'am elav. So ultimately, again, Sanhedrin makes the mistake, and he goes ahead and he marches on Yerushalayim. So the Gemara says, "Hai Rishna lahai parandasha." Rashi says over here, "V'chi meviin daron kazeh la'adon kazeh v'chi nesha emes v'chiskio basanhedrin." So we'll say now the Gemara asks an interesting question. Why was Chizkiyo deserving of this? Right? After all, again, Chizkiyo was a big tzaddik. So why was Chizkiyo deserving of having Sanhedrin march against him? In other words, we'll say, as much as Chizkiyo is successful over Sanhedrin, there's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of difficulty. So Chizkiyo was such a tzaddik. Why did he deserve to have this fear of Sanhedrin marching against him? So Amravina la'achar shekafas HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'nishpa. So we'll say, listen to this. What happened? HaKadosh Baruch Hu swore that Sanhedrin was going to was going to go ahead and march against Chizkiyo. What happened over here? V'amar So I'll say, here's what happened. Hersch says like this: if I tell Chizkiyahu that I'm bringing Sanhedrin against you, but don't worry, because you're going to be successful. What is Chizkiyahu going to say? Amar lo hava ba'ina v'lo b'susa ba'ina. Kadosh Baruch Hu, do me a favor. I appreciate what you're trying to do, because remember again, by bringing Sanhedrin against Chizkiyahu, and then by delivering a stunning victory to Chizkiyahu didn't do anything. Kadosh Baruch Hu wiped out the entire army of Sanhedrin. There was a massive Kiddush Hashem, and it was a massive, wave of Emunah. But Chizkiyahu would have said, you know what, God, it's okay. Let's call it even, right? Don't bring Sanhedrin and don't bring the salvation, right? There's too much anxiety, too much fear that it's going to cause. Just leave it alone. Miyad kafatz Kadosh Baruch Hu v'nishba demaisina lei. Kadosh Baruch Hu therefore swore, and he said, no, I'm bringing Sanhedrin. Shnei amar, nishba Hashem tzavakos leimar, imo kasher demisi kein haisa, v'kasher ya'atzti hi takum, l'shpor ashur ba'artzi, v'al har avusenu, v'sar me'alem, olu v'savalo me'al shech mo'yasur. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu Shalom said, Yavo Sanhedrin v'siyaito, v'yasa avus l'chizkiyahu v'siyaito. I'm going to bring Sanhedrin, but Sanhedrin and his chevra, they're going to become like a trough. They're like a trough for Chizkiyahu and his kingdom. So I want to point out what a profound Gemara this is, right? That sometimes, right, we'll say, we have this thought sometimes. In the Sefer Siduro Shal Shabbos, he brings this down by Yaakov Avinu, that after Yaakov found out that Yosef was alive, so the Siduro Shal Shabbos says, Chadosh Baruch Hu preempted Yaakov. Yaakov would have thought to himself like this: Chadosh Baruch Hu, I'm so happy that Yosef is alive. That's so beautiful. Everything worked out well. Chadosh Baruch Hu, but I have a counter proposal. Instead of everything working out well, why don't you instead what? Leave it alone. Leave it alone. And you could have spared me ultimately again 20 plus years of pain and suffering. That's why the pasuk says, Vayizbach, he offered up karbanos le'elokei Yitzchak Aviv. That Yaakov offered up karbanos to the God of his father. What was Yitzchak? Yitzchak was midas hadin, strict justice. Sometimes strict justice says, we don't understand why HaKadosh Baruch Hu does things. So it's interesting because over here, HaKadosh Baruch Hu knew that had he divulged his plan to Chizkiyahu, Melech Yehuda, Chizkiyahu would have said, God, sounds great, but don't do it. Don't do it. If everything is going to end happily ever after, just leave things alone. And I both say so many times in life, we have this fundamental question. Yeah, things work out. I'm in a stressful crisis situation, difficult situation. It turns out well. And I have such hodah. But there's like this piece of me that thinks, but why did you do it? Very nice you brought the salvation, but the same God who brought the salvation is also what? The same God who brought the crisis. So I have a counter proposal, Kadosh Baruch Hu. Don't bring the crisis, and you won't need the salvation. So that's the cheshbonos of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's where the Rebbe Shalom runs the world, and somehow the crisis was necessary. It's not just the resolution that's necessary, but the crisis itself was necessary. And sometimes those are things that we just will never understand. Let's go a little bit weiter. Says the Gemara, "Vayi bayomahu yasser sivlo me'al shechmecha va'olo me'alecha tzavarecha v'choveh ol mipnei shman." So HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Chizkiyahu, don't worry, everything's going to be okay, and the yoke of Sanhedrin will be lifted upon you, mipnei shaman. Shman. I want to say shman literally means the oil. What's the oil? This is beautiful. Chovel ol shel Sanhedrin mipnei shman shel Chizkiyahu. Literally again, the yoke of Sanhedrin was lifted upon from Klal Yisrael because of the oil of Chizkiyahu. What's the oil of Chizkiyahu? This is beautiful. There was constant oil, constant light. Oil represents light. Constant light burning in the Bati Medrash, in the base Medrash, all over Malchus Yudah from the times Chizkiyahu. Ma'asa. What did Chizkiyahu do? Na'atz cherev al Pesach beis Medrash. He put a sword at the entrance of the base Medrash, and he said, "Va'amar kol mi she'ena osik b'Torah yidaker b'cherev zu." He says, whoever leaves the base Medrash will be stabbed with this sword. We stabbed with this sword. Now, what does this mean? He was literally going to kill people left the base Medrash? No, it's figurative. What Chizkiyahu was trying to tell Klal Yisrael was the following idea. Torah is not a recreational pursuit. Torah is life. Torah is life. And if you don't have it, then you won't have life. That's what he was saying. Both say, sometimes we look at Torah, and what's Torah? Oh, it's very nice, it's beautiful. But Dr. Abraham Tursky has a beautiful idea. He says, he points out, which he says, it always intrigued him how he's what he's talking about, how people fall asleep during the drasha. He said, people fall asleep during the drasha. She says, it's not a new phenomenon. It's minhag Yisrael. Minhag Avosenu biyadenu, right? Right? Falls into Josh says, what's the pshat? He says, can you imagine, right? You're lost in a bad neighborhood. We'll say, these are the days. This is a dated mashal. It's like before Waze, before you're in a bad neighborhood, and you pull into a gas station to go ahead and get directions, and the guy's giving you directions. And can you imagine, like in the middle of directions, you're like this, right? He says, no one's nodding off in the middle. Why? Because that's going to save your life. He says, if we realized that words of Torah literally are life-saving, life-saving, hey, then we would never nod off. Sometimes the rabbi speaks too long. God, right, or whatever. And it's not everybody is an orator. Okay, fair, right? But Lamaisa, a lot of it is us. It's easy to blame someone else for not being entertaining enough or engaging enough. A lot of it is us and how we relate to Torah. And the truth is, a lot of times we think, it's a beautiful vart. It's a beautiful insight, a beautiful idea. It's not a beautiful vart. It's not a beautiful idea. It's life-saving directions. That's what Chizkiyahu was trying to highlight. The sword was there not as a punitive measure, but to show Torah is not something nice. Torah is life-saving. If you have it, it will literally save yourself from making such dramatic bad decisions or mistakes. If you don't have it, then unfortunately, again, chas v'shalom, I can find myself in such negative straits. So the Gemara goes right, let's finish off this. The Gemara says, they checked from Dan until Beersheba, there was not an Amaris, there was no one who was ignorant in the words of Torah, all the way from Gvas until Antipris. And everyone was well versed in the laws of Tumah and Tara. Just one more minute. Amen. So we'll say, so incredible. First of all, just to understand the level of scholarship which existed during the days of Chizkiyahu. Everyone was versed. Everyone was knowledgeable. Everyone, again, we'll say, by the way, in what? Not Maseches Brachos, right? Not Hilchos Shabbos. Well, look what they're referring to over here, right? The halachos of Tumah and Tara. We'll say, what happens when we get to us? So give Tumah and Tara. What happens? Come on, what happens? You look ahead and you say, how long is this going on for, right? When is this going to be over? We'll say, those halachos be over. Everyone, men, women, children, were versed in the halachos of Tumah and Tara. And also, again, in those days, the Gemara says, people had very simple material aspirations, right? They had a cow, they had 2 sheep, and they were happy. So I'll say, listen to this. So they were happy with very small things materially, and furthermore, they had vines that had thousands of dollars worth of grapes, and it just kind of lie in waste. Why did it lie in waste? People were neglecting their fields. Why were they neglecting their fields? Because they put their full focus on ruchnius. And I will say it was the oil which represents the ongoing commitment to spiritual growth during the days of Chizkiyahu Melech Yehuda, that ultimately, again, allowed them to be successful over Sanhedrin Melech Asher. I will say, right, much more to say. We'll stop where I will say. Shkoyach. Okay, end of the week. We ended off where we needed to end off, pretty much. Shkoyach, have an incredible week. Shkoyach. Everyone is... All right, good Shabbos, everyone. Shiloh.
Same thing. And uses that as the muscle for our HaKadosh Baruch Hu, for our leaving HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
Right.
That the Kichon is what they were trying to protect.
That's right. So the water source, right? So you can go ahead. You can start. Yeah.